Stick two different pieces of metal in the dirt around a tomato plant. Connect them with a wire, and suddenly that plant grows like it's on steroids. No fertilizer, no special lights, just basic physics that's been hiding in plain sight for over a century. Sounds like pseudoscience until you actually try it and watch what happens. So what's going on here? And why isn't every gardener doing this? Because this gets weird. Here's the setup. You need two different metals. Copper and zinc work great. Iron and aluminum also work. You stick them in the soil around your plant, maybe 6 inches apart, and you connect them with a wire. That's it. That's the whole thing. And somehow this improves plant growth. Bigger leaves, stronger stems, increased yields. It's real, but almost nobody knows about it. And before you roll your eyes and click away thinking this is some new age crystal healing nonsense, hang on. This isn't about magnetic bracelets or charging your plants with positive vibes. This is about actual measurable electrical current flowing through the soil. You can hook up a multimeter and watch the voltage. It's right there. Physics doesn't care about your skepticism. Let's talk about what's actually happening. Because the explanation is wilder than you'd think. When you stick two different metals into moist soil and connect them, you've just built a battery. A really primitive battery, but a battery nonetheless. The soil acts as an electrolyte. The metals are your electrodes. And boom, you've got electron flow. Voltage is usually pretty low, maybe 0.5 volt to 2 volts depending on the metals and soil conditions. Current is measured in milliamps. It's not powering your phone, but apparently, it's enough to affect plants. By the way, people have known about this for over 150 years. In the 1840s, a German scientist named Gustav Fechner was experimenting with electrical currents in plant growth. He noticed effects. Then in the early 1900s, a researcher named Lemström in Finland was running currents through crops and seeing improved yields. The Soviets did extensive research on this in the 1960s. The Japanese studied it in the 1970s. There's a whole history here that somehow never made it into mainstream agriculture. Why didn't it catch on? Because it's weird. It doesn't fit into the existing framework of how we think about plant nutrition. We understand nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. We understand photosynthesis, water, sunlight. But tiny electrical currents affecting growth. That's not in the textbooks. And if it's not in the textbooks, farmers aren't learning it, extension agents aren't teaching it, and it stays forgotten in old research papers. When roots detect water, electrical signals help coordinate growth toward that water. Plants are constantly using electrical signaling for communication and coordination. It's like a nervous system, but way slower and much simpler. So what happens when you introduce an external electrical field? You're potentially influencing those internal electrical signals. You might be affecting how nutrients move through the plant. You might be changing the electrical charge on cell membranes, which affects how easily nutrients can pass through. You might be influencing the soil microbiome, because bacteria also respond to electrical fields. There's also something called electrophoresis happening. That's the movement of charged particles in response to an electrical field. Many nutrients in soil are charged ions. Calcium. They all carry electrical charges. When you create an electrical field in the soil, these ions start moving. They might move toward the roots faster than they would through normal diffusion. Essentially, you're giving nutrients a slight push toward the plant. Now let's talk about soil chemistry, because this is where things get complicated. Soil isn't just dirt. It's a complex mixture of minerals, organic matter, water, air, and billions of microorganisms. The electrical conductivity of soil depends on moisture content, mineral composition, pH, temperature, all sorts of factors. Sandy soil conducts differently than clay soil. Dry soil barely conducts at all. Wet soil conducts better. When you stick your two metal electrodes in the soil, the current flows between them through the soil. The path of least resistance is usually through the moisture. Water with dissolved minerals conducts electricity. The current isn't huge, but it's there, and it creates an electrical field in the soil around your plant's roots. Here's what some of the research has found. In multiple studies, seeds germinated faster when subjected to weak electrical currents. We're talking about germination time, reduced by 20 to 30% in some cases. Seedlings showed increased root development. The root systems were more extensive, more branched. Above ground, plants showed increased leaf area and thicker stems. Some studies found increased chlorophyll content, meaning the plants were potentially photosynthesizing more efficiently. Yield improvements varied depending on the crop and the specific setup, but increases of 10 to 30% weren't uncommon in controlled experiments. That's significant. That's the kind of improvement that could actually matter to farmers if it could be scaled up reliably. But here's the catch. The effect isn't consistent. Some studies found dramatic improvements. Others found minimal effects. Some found that too much current actually inhibited growth. It's not as simple as more electricity equals better plants. There's an optimal range. And that range seems to depend on the specific plant species, soil type, moisture level, and probably a dozen other variables we haven't figured out yet. This is why it hasn't been commercialized. Consistent techniques. Something that works 90% of the time across different conditions. Electroculture doesn't meet that bar yet. It's too finicky. The effects are real, but they're hard to predict and control. Now let's get practical. How would you actually try this in your garden? Let's say you want to experiment with a tomato plant. You need two different metals. Copper and zinc are the classic combination. You can use copper wire or copper pipe for one electrode. For zinc, galvanized nails work because they're coated with zinc. Or you can find zinc plates online pretty easily. You stick them in the soil on opposite sides of your plant. 6 to 8 inches apart is usually good. They should go down into the soil a few inches, deep enough to be in contact with moist soil. Then you connect them with a wire. Copper wire works fine. Just wrap it around both electrodes to complete the circuit. And that's it. You've built an earth battery around your plant. If you want to get fancy, you can hook up a multimeter and measure the voltage. You should see something, even if it's just a fraction of a volt. If you're seeing 0, either your soil is too dry or your connections aren't good. Now here's where people get creative, and things get questionable. Some people claim you need to add antennas, vertical copper pipes sticking up to capture atmospheric electricity. Some people talk about aligning things with magnetic north. Some people bring in pyramid power and sacred geometry. This is where electroculture veers off into pseudoscience territory, the basic earth battery effect. Two metals in soil, creating a weak current. That's real physics. You can measure it. The elaborate additions that some people promote, most of that is probably not doing anything. It might look cool, and if it makes you excited about your garden, great. But scientifically, there's no good evidence that adding antennas or aligning with magnetic fields actually matters. Let's talk about what might actually be happening at the cellular level, because this is where it gets genuinely fascinating. Plant cells have an electrical charge difference across their membranes. It's called membrane potential. The inside of the cell is slightly negative compared to the outside. This charge difference is crucial for nutrient transport. Cells actively pump ions in and out, and this requires energy. When you introduce an external electrical field, even a weak one, you might be affecting these membrane potentials. You might be making it slightly easier for cells to move nutrients across membranes. Or you might be affecting the proteins in the membrane that act as ion channels. Small changes in electrical environment can affect protein shape, which affects function. There's also the effect on soil microorganisms. Bacteria, fungi, all the tiny life in soil, they're sensitive to electrical fields. Some research has shown that weak electrical currents can stimulate beneficial bacteria, increase their activity, potentially increase their nitrogen fixation rates. If you're boosting the microbial activity around your plant's roots, that could explain improved growth. The root zone, the rhizosphere, is already a hotbed of electrical activity. Roots release organic compounds, protons. They take up nutrients, all of which involves electrical charges moving around. There's naturally occurring electrical potential in the rhizosphere. You're potentially amplifying or modifying that natural electrical environment. Now let's address something important. Does this replace fertilizer? No. Absolutely not. Plants still need nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and all the micronutrients. Electricity doesn't create nutrients out of nothing. What it might do is help plants access the nutrients that are already in the soil more efficiently. It might stimulate root growth so the plant can explore more soil volume. It might boost microbial activity that makes nutrients more available. But if your soil is nutrient poor, no amount of electrical trickery is going to fix that. Think of electroculture as a potential enhancer, not a replacement for good soil management. You still need organic matter, you still need balanced nutrients, you still need proper watering. The Earth battery is potentially giving you an extra edge, maybe a 10 or 20% boost on top of everything else you're doing right. There's also the question of different metal combinations. Copper and zinc is the most studied combination, but people have experimented with others: copper and iron, aluminum and copper, magnesium and copper. Each combination produces a different voltage because each metal has a different position in what's called the galvanic series. The further apart two metals are in that series, the higher the voltage you get. But higher voltage doesn't necessarily mean better results. Like 0.5 to 1 volt might actually be optimal. Higher voltages might stress the plant. It's finding that sweet spot that's tricky. Polarity might matter too. Current flowing in one direction might have different effects than current flowing the other direction. Some studies found that having the positive electrode closer to the stem and the negative electrode further away worked better. Other studies found the opposite. This is part of why the research is so inconsistent. There are too many variables and not enough systematic study. Here's something else that's interesting. The effect might be stronger during certain phases of plant growth. Some research suggests that electrical stimulation during germination has the strongest effect. Getting seeds to sprout faster and establish stronger root systems early on might set the plant up for better growth throughout its life. Applying electrical current to mature plants showed less dramatic effects. This makes sense from a biological standpoint. Young, rapidly dividing cells are more responsive to external signals. Once a plant is established and growth slows down, it's less plastic, less able to respond to new stimuli. There's also the question of duration. Do you leave the electrodes in place permanently, or do you apply current intermittently? Some people leave their earth batteries connected all season. Others suggest connecting them for a few hours a day. There's no consensus because there hasn't been enough research to establish best practices. What about different crops? Most of the research has been done on things like tomatoes, but it's not reliable enough that you can give someone a simple set of instructions and guarantee results. It's right on the edge of being useful and being too unpredictable to bother with. Let's talk about some of the wilder claims out there, because we need to separate what's plausible from what's nonsense. Some people claim that electroculture can increase yields by 100 or 200%. That's almost certainly exaggerated. The best controlled studies show improvements in the 10 to 30% range. If someone's seeing massive improvements, it's probably because their control group was doing poorly for other reasons. Some people claim it makes plants resistant to pests and diseases. There's actually a tiny bit of evidence for this. Plants under mild electrical stimulation might produce more defensive compounds. Stress responses in plants can make them less attractive to pests. But this is speculative. Don't throw away your integrated pest management strategies because you stuck some copper in the ground. Some people claim electroculture eliminates the need for watering or changes the water requirements of plants. That's definitely false. Plants still transpire. They still need water for photosynthesis and nutrient transport. Electricity doesn't change the basic biochemistry of how plants work. Here's what might actually be true. Electroculture might help plants develop more extensive root systems. More roots mean the plant can explore more soil and access more water. So indirectly, a plant with better roots might be more drought tolerant. But that's not the same as saying electricity replaces water. Now let's talk about the historical angle, because there's some fascinating stuff here. In the 1920s and 30s, there was a brief period where electroculture was actually used commercially in some places. There are records of farmers in Europe using overhead wire systems to create electrical fields over their crops. Some reported good results, others didn't. The practice faded out, probably because it was labor-intensive to set up, and the results were too inconsistent. There's also a connection to atmospheric electricity. During thunderstorms, massive electrical fields exist between the clouds and the ground. After thunderstorms, farmers have long noted that crops often seem to perk up. Some of that is obviously from the rain, but some researchers have wondered if the electrical component matters too. Lightning puts a huge amount of nitrogen into the soil through nitrogen fixation in the air. That's well established. But might there also be an electrical stimulation effect? Some of the elaborate electroculture setups with tall antennas are trying to capture this atmospheric electricity to essentially create a continuous mild version of the thunderstorm effect. It's an interesting idea, but there's not much evidence that it works. The electrical fields during a storm are millions of volts. Your little copper antenna isn't capturing anything comparable. Let's get back to practical experimentation. If you want to try this, start small. Pick one plant as your test subject. Set up a simple earth battery with copper and zinc. Keep everything else constant. Same soil, same watering schedule, same location. Then compare it to a control plant without the electrodes. Take measurements: plant height, leaf count, stem thickness. Take photos at regular intervals. If you want to be really rigorous, weigh the harvest at the end. Document everything. The plural of anecdote isn't data, but if you run a careful experiment and see consistent results, that's meaningful to you even if it's not publishable science. Be aware of confounding variables. Is it because of the electricity? Or is it because you paid more attention to it? The act of setting up the experiment might have made you more invested in that plant's success, so you unconsciously gave it better care. This is why scientific studies use blind protocols. Try to be as objective as possible. Also, be prepared for the possibility that you see no effect. Soil conditions, plant genetics, weather, all of these might matter more than the small electrical current you're introducing. If it doesn't work for you, that doesn't mean the whole concept is fake. It might just mean the conditions weren't right. There's also the DIY improvement angle. Some people have built more sophisticated earth battery systems with multiple electrodes, with capacitors to store charge, with solar panels to add additional current. These systems can get complex. Whether the added complexity produces better results is questionable. Remember, the best scientific results came from very simple setups. More complicated doesn't always mean more effective. One more thing worth discussing is the energy source. Where is the electricity coming from in an earth battery? It's coming from the chemical potential difference between the two metals. Essentially, one of your metals is slowly corroding. Zinc is usually the sacrificial metal. Over time, your zinc electrode will corrode away and need to be replaced. That's where the energy is coming from. You're converting chemical energy from metal corrosion into electrical energy. And somehow, that electrical energy is benefiting the plant. The amount of energy is tiny. A typical earth battery might produce 50 milliamps at 0.5 volts. That's 0.025 watts. Over a whole growing season, you're talking about a few watt-hours of energy. For comparison, photosynthesis in a single tomato plant captures thousands of times more energy from sunlight. So we're not talking about a huge energy input. We're talking about a tiny signal that somehow affects biological processes. This is why the effect is subtle. You're not powering the plant. You're potentially influencing regulatory processes that control growth. Small signals can have outsized effects in biological systems if they hit the right pathways. A tiny amount of hormone can cause massive changes in plant growth. Maybe electrical signals work similarly, amplifying through biological pathways to produce effects larger than the energy input would suggest. The bottom line is this: electroculture is real enough to be interesting, but not reliable enough to be standard practice. If you're a curious gardener who likes experimenting, it's worth trying. You might see benefits. You might not. But you'll learn something either way. And isn't that part of the fun of gardening? The science is still catching up. As we learn more about plant electrophysiology, about how plants sense and respond to electrical signals, we might figure out how to use electroculture more effectively. Or we might discover that the effects are too variable to ever be practical at scale. Either way, it's a fascinating intersection of physics, chemistry, and biology that's been hiding in plain sight for over a century. Thanks for watching. If you try this in your garden, leave a comment about your results. And if you want more deep dives into weird gardening science, hit subscribe.